County. He's been on the front lines of Vermont politics for decades, Anthony?
Seems like a long time.
He does. From founding rural Vermont to help Vermont farmers get a fair share for their product and give them an effective voice on agricultural policy. He is a relentless advocate for reducing the costs of higher education and fighting for a state bank. Anthony has challenged the political status quo from the grassroots outside the State House and now from his seat in the Vermont Senate. Anthony, please proceed.
Sorry I was late. I was actually at the Cabot with our United States Senator, so I bugged out earlier on that to be here. I really just want to make 2 points, and not having heard what other people have said, hopefully I'm not going to be too redundant, although I think in these kinds of things redundancy is sort of what happens a lot of the time, because everybody has a lot of good things to say about the person that we're talking about. But I want to talk about 2 things. One, I want to be really clear for those of you who are not quite sure that the office of Lieutenant Governor is not a symbolic office. Sometimes people will say, well, what does the Lieutenant Governor do anyway? What difference does it make? Why should we work hard to get somebody elected Lieutenant Governor? The Lieutenant Governor doesn't do anything except pretend they're governor when the governor's out of town. That's simply not true. As someone who has sat in the Senate for the last couple of years and has watched very closely how the Senate operates, I guarantee you that it is very important who the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Vermont is. From being a part of selecting who sits on what committees, who's going to be the chair of the Healthcare Committee, who's going to be the chair of the Finance Committee, where the Progressive's going to sit, where the Republican's going to sit. The Lieutenant Governor is intimately involved in that process. In terms of the rulemaking process, in terms of how the flow of legislation comes through the Senate, the Lieutenant Governor is an important part of that process. In terms of setting priorities as to what comes to the floor and when, the Lieutenant Governor is a part of that process. One of the more interesting things is deciding what is germane or relevant to a bill that's being debated. We had a number of occasions, I don't know whether opportunities is the right word, but a number of times many of us in the Senate tried to move forward with a bill that would allow child care workers to organize. We eventually did do that. It's a long and winding story. But a lot of what it had to do with was finding a way to make sure that bill was heard on the Senate floor so we could get a straight up or down vote on it. And so we tried to attach it to various bills that were quite relevant to other kinds of labor bills. But it's up to the Lieutenant Governor, with some help from the Secretary of the Senate, but it's up to the Lieutenant Governor to decide if those things are relevant and if they can and should be debated. That's an important role for any party to take. Also, breaking tie votes is an important role for the Lieutenant Governor. It doesn't happen that often, but oddly enough, it happens when something is really important and the Senate is split and there's a lot of strong feelings on both sides. It's kind of rare to have a tie vote on the Senate. When you have a tie vote on the Senate, it's really important that the Lieutenant Governor be on your side in that vote if you want to win that vote. So the Lieutenant Governor plays an important role there. Plus, for what it's worth, the Lieutenant Governor is one of the very few people in this building that actually has staff people, that has an office, that has a place where you can meet and decide what to organize around and how you're going to go about doing that organizing. So again, the Lieutenant Governor has a lot of influence over what happens in this building. And as the second highest office holder in the state, the Lieutenant Governor has a lot of influence over shaping the debate that happens outside this building as well. The Lieutenant Governor has the time often to shape that debate as well during the off-season. So again, without being redundant, it is important who is elected Lieutenant Governor, and it is important that the Lieutenant Governor be someone who is progressive-minded and forward-thinking, because that's where the majority of Vermonters are. Second thing I just want to mention briefly is this idea of leadership. And I think oftentimes we sometimes forget who our leaders are. And we do that in part sometimes because we have short-term political memories. We forget what happened 10 years ago, and we praise the Senate for shutting down Vermont Yankee at the time, for example. And we forget that there were activists who sat down in front of Vermont Yankee 30 years ago and started that movement to shut down Vermont Yankee. We forget about those activists And we praise those senators who made the courageous vote 30 years after the citizens decided it was time to do something. So sometimes it's short-term memory. Sometimes, though, it's frankly because leaders are doing what leaders do. They're leading. And by the time we all catch up with them, those leaders are on to other things because they've done their work of providing that leadership. And that's a role that Dean Corren has played very dramatically over the years. And I know you've heard about this already, but we talk about some of the bigger social and cultural issues in the state of Vermont, like marriage equality. We praise the courage of those senators and House members, rightfully so, who voted for marriage equality. We forget that Dean Corren introduced the first marriage equality bill 20 years earlier than that. We're all involved in this healthcare fight, and we're praising those leaders in the Senate and in the House and in the governor's office and elsewhere who are willing to provide leadership on healthcare reform. And single-payer healthcare has now become sort of the accepted thing in the state of Vermont. Nobody's quite sure how we're going to get there, but everybody's pretty sure that that's where they want to go. It's been an important transition and a development in the state of Vermont that people are so accepting of single-payer healthcare and universal healthcare. So it's easy to forget the fact that Dean Corren introduced a bill to do just that about 20 years ago, because he was a leader then, and it's easy to forget sometimes what leaders do. We talk about the influence or the importance of renewable energy to our economy. And we talk a lot about in economic development in this building and in the economic development bills. We need to encourage entrepreneurship and have legislators who understand entrepreneurs and understand the important role of renewable energy. Well, Dean Corren's been working on renewable energy and been an entrepreneur for a long time. So I guess I just wanted us to realize that that's an important message for us to bring to Vermonters, that sometimes because you have not heard of someone for a while, it's not because they haven't been doing things for a while. It's because you just caught up to the things that they were doing 20 years ago. And now we're off doing other kinds of things. So that leadership and that vision and that in the years to come, it's really important that we have as many people on board as possible. And given the role that the Lieutenant Governor plays in this building and as a voice for citizens around the state, it's really important that we have a Lieutenant Governor who's going to stick with us every step of the way. So leadership and vision, being practical, being able to get things done, that's what Dean Corren's about, and that's why I'm really glad he's going to be our next Lieutenant Governor.